Let me tell you a story about a little boy. He went to an air show with his dad, and he loved airplanes. I can relate to this little boy. He loved airplanes, and he loved the fighter aircraft especially. He loved the noise. He loved the high-speed passes. He loved the simulated bombing runs. He loved the loops and the rolls. And at some point during the show, he pulls on his dad's pant leg and says, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a fighter pilot." And his dad kind of chuckled, looked down at him and said, "Son, I'm sorry, but you can't do both." And it's true. You cannot grow up and be a fighter pilot. I was a fighter pilot. My dad before me was a fighter pilot. You spend your time going fast, dropping bombs, shooting a huge gun, and doing loops and rolls and forever feeling like an 8-year-old boy. I loved that job. And I spent my younger years trying to become a fighter pilot. What I didn't understand was that in becoming a fighter pilot and an officer in the Air Force, I was going to become a project manager. And I love Quincy's word, the project leader. I never really liked the word manager. Leader is so much more appropriate for what you guys do. And turn this on. This is what we're going to focus on today for the next little bit. Quincy talked about confident leadership. And I will say that confident leadership and creating a culture of confident leaders comes from a couple of key steps. And if you follow these key steps, I don't care what you do, I don't care your level of expertise in your specific career field, if you as a leader follow these key steps, you're going to be a confident leader, and from top to bottom in your organization, there is going to be a confidence in decision-making and an ability to move forward as an organization. As I went onto the Project Management Institute's website, I loved what you guys had. I loved that it has vision, this is what we're doing, or a mission and then vision. This is where we want to go. This is what we aspire to be. And in everything you do, even the smallest tasks, I highly encourage you that you do the exact same thing. What am I doing, and where do I want to go with my team? Now, becoming a fighter pilot, many years ago when I was in pilot training, one of the advanced skills they taught us was how to fly fingertip formation. Now, when you're sitting there in the classroom with your instructor, and he's talking about, there's some key things that they teach you. You got to wiggle your fingers and wiggle your toes, and you grip the stick and the throttles very, very loosely, and you breathe like you're doing yoga. And it sounded so easy. And then I got in the aircraft, and we start rolling down the runway, and we're just a few feet from that other aircraft, and you're going 0 miles an hour and 50 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, and you lift off the ground, and that yoga breathing turns into hyperventilation. And it was anything but relaxing. And the gripping the stick lightly and wiggling your fingers and toes, that turned into a death grip on both the stick and the throttle. And everything I could do to control my breathing, which I wasn't very successful at, and the sweat that was dripping down my forehead into my eyes. It was not very easy. How many of you have done something where you're sitting in a classroom and it seems real easy, and when they explain it to you, it seems real easy? And then you go out and do it, and it's not so easy. And it makes it even worse that you're sitting next to a person, or the person who's teaching you, and it's easy for them. You've seen them do it. I'm like, why can't I do that? Why does this stress me out so much? And that's the way flying was for me. For you, it may be flying an airplane. It may be skydiving. It may be mountain biking in Moab, which also makes me hyperventilate. Or it may be something else, like standing on a stage like this and talking to a large audience. Being a parent for the first time. Getting a project that overwhelms you to think about. I remember when I first went to the Pentagon, going back to not realizing I was going to be a project manager, and they sent me to the Pentagon, and I'm the chief of A10 and RAGE programming. I had no idea what that was. I didn't know what a programmer was. I didn't know anything like that. And I show up, and I'm given this $5 billion program. Like, holy cow, what am I supposed to do with this? And 2 weeks into it, I'm briefing the higher up generals on what the Air Force position is on one of these programs. I'm like, I didn't even know the name of that before I showed up here 2 weeks ago, and now I'm briefing it. But I had some good mentors to kind of coach me along the way. So getting back to flying, it was very challenging at first, and I had a bunch of great instructors, and their job was to trust me enough to learn and to teach me the skills, to show me the way, show me what right looked like, and then teach me the skills and let me do it and give me some feedback as I learned how to do it. And also not let me kill myself and the other people in the formation. That was kind of an important safety tip. And I wish that they trusted me, and I will admit that I wasn't very good at first. I wish that they had trusted me a little bit more, because I'd get in a position and then I'd start to bob a little bit. And I'd move out of position. We'd go into 90 degrees of bank. I'm like, I'm going to slide down on top, and they would just scare me. And so I'd kind of pull away, and they'd say, I got the aircraft. They'd take the aircraft, and they'd put me back in position. And then my flight lead would turn into me, and that was kind of scary. And so I'd drop down, and I'd slide out, and I'd come back. And I'm like, you're out of position. He'd put me back into position. And so I learned what right looked like, but I never really learned the skills. And I graduated from pilot training not really feeling like I was good enough to fly formation on my own, to do it on my own. And so I was kind of terrified of it. And then fast forward, where I got to fly that beautiful aircraft there, the A-10, and as you can see, there's only one seat in it. And so the Air Force was trusting me to fly this $22 million aircraft, and I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't know how to fly close formation like that, and they trusted me to do it. So I had to learn myself. When I made a mistake, the only person that was going to fix that mistake was me. When I was flying correctly, the only person that was doing that was me. And over time, I finally gained confidence in how to fly close formation. And I could do it at night. I could do it in bad weather. I could do it in bumpy weather. I mean, there were times when I'm flying just a few feet away from the other aircraft and going into South Georgia clouds, and I'd see him and I wouldn't see him. And I'd see him and I wouldn't see him. I go one potato, I'm about ready to pull away, and then I'd see him again, or I can see a shadow of an aircraft. And you get to where you just don't even think about it, and because the Air Force had trusted me with that aircraft. And I had learned the skills eventually to how to manage that aircraft. So the first thing I want to talk about is vision. And I love that Quincy talked about vision, being visionary. How many people here, you don't have to show a hand, you don't have to raise your hand if your boss is sitting next to you, but how many people here have ever worked in an organization that didn't really have a clear direction? It's frustrating, isn't it? It's really like, what am I doing? You feel like you're just showing up and you're punching a clock, and then at the end of the day, you're punching a clock out, but you really don't know, what is my purpose? Where am I going? And that's not where you want to be. The number one job of a leader, I don't care how big your team is, the number one job of a leader is to provide that vision, is to provide a direction of where we're going. I talked about the PMI and what they have on their website, and that's fantastic. But down at the lower level, at the project level, you still need a vision. You still need to let people know where we're going. In the military, we call it desired end state, commander's intent. The commander wants us to go here, and our desired end state is X. However you want to phrase it, it's critical that you provide that. Let me give you an example. A number of years ago, from my history, I was a fighter squadron commander. Being a fighter squadron commander, I wanted to fly fighters, but I really wanted to be a fighter squadron commander. My dad had told me that was the best job ever, because you got to fly still a lot, but you got to lead a team of highly experienced aviators and professionals. So I'm just made commander of the 75th Fighter Squadron, which is a historic squadron whose legacy I felt. I was the 53rd commander. I had 52 people before me, all the way back to World War II, who had done some amazing things, some real war heroes, and then there was just me. And I had taken over that seat. I was following a guy that I really respected, that I and I had been his second in command, and I really loved what he did. So I'm sitting in my office, and I think, what do I do? You know, what are the most important things? And the two big questions were, how do I maintain the existing standard of excellence that was alive and well in the squadron? How do I not screw that up? And then what is my vision? What vision can I pass on that is not going to sound cliche and just kind of an also-ran, just mimicking what somebody had done before me? So I first thought about the standard of excellence, and in the squadron we had a saying. We're the 75th Fighter Squadron, the Tiger Sharks. And we had a saying that was Shark Standard. If it was meant doing, it was meant doing well. If it was worth our time, it was worth enough time to do it with a level of excellence that was above reproach. I said, that's good enough. I'm not going to mess that. We're going to keep going with that. So Shark Standard stayed our mantra of how we were approaching it, kind of like our values. Quality was our value. The next thing was, what is my vision? Well, our mission in the organization was close air support. So we provided support to the ground forces. And so we'd show up on station, overhead, and we would talk to the controller on the ground, and he would say, the ground commander wants to do this, we're taking fire here, whatever it is, and we were there to provide them, three-dimensional eyes. We were there to provide them firepower, really whatever they needed. That's what we were there for. And I thought about it, and I said, world's greatest CAS, world's greatest close air support. And that kind of stuck with me, and I shared it with my leadership team, and they liked it. So that became our vision. We aspired to be the world's greatest close air support. And so we posted that on the wall. We put it in our emails. We built objectives and goals that were based on that. And so we talked, we trained. Everything we did had a focus of being that world's greatest close air support in everything we did. Think of your own organization, in the team that you're leading, and then your overall organization, and say, what is our vision? Where do I aspire to be? What is my intent? And then make sure you write that down, and make sure your team understands that. Fast forward, with World's Greatest CAS, 18 months, I was nearing the end of my 2-year tour as a commander, and we deployed to Afghanistan. And over our door was a sign that said, find a way to say yes. An 18-year-old with a rifle's life may depend on it today. My why, my reason for being, and our team's reason for being, and the purpose and the weight of that World's Greatest CAS didn't get any clearer at that point. I was there, we were there for that 18-year-old with a rifle on the ground, for that father, son, wife, husband, whoever, child. We were there to protect them. We were there to make sure that they could call home to mama that night after we had finished serving them. And it's one of the most gratifying experiences in the world that I've ever had. And I was so glad that we trained to that kind of level of standard. Now, I asked you earlier, how many people have been in an organization that doesn't really have a clear vision? And I've also been there myself. I was once in an organization, we weren't a very large organization, but I was once in an organization where we had a lot of really deep resumes, a lot of very competent people who had been there, done that, and yet as a team, we were all unclear. Where are we going? What do we make? Who is our customer? What matters to us? Because the leadership team at the top never really said so. And I was the director of marketing and business development for the team. You imagine, I'm trying to take care of a customer, and I'm not really sure who that customer is. I'm trying to present products, write proposals to customers, and there were a lot of times where I would start down a path, and I would get corrected. Oh, no, we don't want to work with them. Like, okay. Well, you tell me who we want to work with. You're paying me, and I'm happy to go in that direction. But it was very unclear. And by the number of hands that have gone up, I'm sure you've all felt something very, very similar, and how frustrating that is. So how do we avoid that? In your team, you sit down, and I used to call it my commander's time. You sit down and you ask yourself, where do I want to go? What matters to me? Where do I want to go with my team? And I articulate that. You articulate that to yourself, and then you share it with your team. How many people here like following checklists? I'll tell you right now, I hate checklists. There's value in them, but I can't stand checklists. Flying an airplane, every airplane I flew, we had big, thick checklists. And as you first learn how to fly the airplane, you memorize those checklists, and you go through them over and over again. But what I quickly learned, in the A-10, we had a map case over here, and my checklist never left the map case. I never pulled it out. And it wasn't because I wasn't fulfilling the steps in that checklist, but I had learned it. More than anything, I had envisioned what it looked like to fly an A-10. I had envisioned what it looked like to do my overall job. And so the steps got taken care of. I had panels, switches and panels and buttons on the left side and on the right side and in front of me, and I had screens, and I had a way of setting up my screens for how I managed the information. And I covered those checklists, but that wasn't my focus. My focus was flying the aircraft successfully, doing it successfully. So as you build checklists, what I would say is that a checklist is not a vision. A checklist are a series of steps to help you succeed in that vision. Checklists, you can see them as kind of mini objectives as you're going towards that vision, but it is not a vision. You have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this checklist? Why do I even have this checklist? And go from there. Why do I care about vision? The first thing is because it unburdens me as a leader. When I sit down and I think through, what is my vision? Where do I want to go? Where do I want this team to go? And then I verbalize it and I share it with my team. I'm taking it off my shoulders and I'm sharing it with that team. I've just unburdened myself as a leader. Now you call it shared misery or shared vision, shared excitement, but I've just unburdened that responsibility and shared it with my team to where it becomes theirs. And then the next thing is that it inspires. If you don't sit and write your own vision of where you want to go with your team, and you're not excited about it, I challenge you to sit down and think a little bit more about a vision, about where you want to go and where you want to take, because it should excite you. I don't care what career field you're in. The sense of accomplishment, the sense of a direction of feeling that like I'm going somewhere, it should inspire you. And then as you share it with your team, you go back and forth to make sure they understand it, it should inspire them also. And then the last thing a vision does is it breeds thinking and action. When you tell people where you're going, they're not pulling out their checklist and going to the next step, but next I have to do this. They may be referencing the checklist to help them along the way, but their eyes are on the vision. Their eyes are on the target, not stuck on a step in the checklist that, if taken out of context, doesn't make any sense. That's what vision is going to do for you. So you create this vision after you've sat down, and all you guys are going to do this and review what you already have and come up with a vision. You're going to then share that vision with your team, like I said. And then the real question is, how much are you going to trust your team with that vision? Because that's the real test of a leader, is how much do I trust my team with that vision? How many of you work in a small company? Yeah, I've seen it before in small companies. I consult with small companies mainly, but also large companies. And sometimes that vision or the product is the owner's baby. And they cradle it and they protect it, and nobody else knows it like they do. So it's their baby, and so they have a tough time sharing it. But if they really want the growth they're looking for, they have to share that vision with their team. They have to allow their team to move. Because if they don't share it, you end up in a really terrible place, which is called a no-trust organization. And there have been a number of studies about no trust organizations. Here's the difference between high trust and low trust. This is done by Harvard Business Review. And I want to work in an organization that has this kind of a response. So high trust versus low trust. 74% less stress. Everybody here feels stressed at work. Well, if I can have 74, even any amount of less stress, that's awesome. 106% more energy. That's a pretty big deal. And I'm guessing this is without the Starbucks. They have that much more energy. Higher productivity. So I'm getting significantly more out of my employees, significantly more out of my team members, because they're engaged, they feel trusted, they feel like it's their baby also. Fewer sick days, 76% more engagement. Now, I read another study where a third of your workers at any given time are not engaged. They're showing up, they're clocking in, they're on Facebook, they're doing whatever, but they're not really engaged in the project. If they feel trusted, if they feel like it's their project also, like they're part of the team, they're an owner instead of just an employee, they're going to be much more engaged. And I love 29% more satisfaction with their lives. That's not just more job satisfaction. Give people a purpose. As an aside, 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I can completely relate to that. Somebody's on a team, they're in a company, a platoon, whatever, and then they step out of the military and they're not sure where they are. They're just a number, they're just an employee. And they feel a little bit lost. They don't have their brothers and sisters around them that have their back, that are protecting them. Make people part of a team, make people excited about it. And if they're excited about their job, they're going to be excited about their lives in general. It's going to translate into happier. 40% less burnout. So what do all these things mean? It means your investment, your ROI is going to be significantly higher. It means your turnover is going to be lower. And everybody here knows what turnover costs. It's painful both in time and resources and training requirements. It means you're going to move in the right direction. You're going to have fewer HR complaints because people are going to want to work through things because they love what they're doing. They love your team. That's what a high-trust organization is all about. Now, this is what it does to them. When they feel like they're part of the team, it empowers their decision-making. They feel, he trusts me to not only know, but to act on what I know now, to act on what the mission of our organization is and the vision of our organization is. It makes a huge difference for a team. So I sometimes, I don't know if it's a hobby or self-punishment or what, but I sometimes teach young kids how to fly airplanes. How many people here have flown a small airplane? It's awesome. If you want to boost in confidence, learn how to land an airplane without somebody sitting next to you. It's amazing what it does to an individual to learn how to land an airplane and go, I just didn't kill myself all by myself. It's pretty amazing. So the way I start, I take a kid, and this kid, normally they barely know how to drive a car, and they're sitting next to me, and I'm in where they hurt themselves more than anything, where pilots hurt themselves more than any other time, is on the takeoff and the landing. They stall the airplane, or they ram it to the ground, do things that you're not supposed to do with an airplane. So if you look at that airplane, it's a tricycle. And you're trying to take a flying tricycle and teach somebody how to take a flying tricycle and set it down anywhere between 60 and 100 miles an hour and not fall over sideways or cartwheel or anything like that, and turn it into a tricycle. And the first couple landings are always not very, very good. But what I do is I teach them, so I talk about it on the ground, and then we get in the aircraft, and I'll fly, and I'm talking the whole time about what right looks like and how they should see it, so trying to create a vision for them of what flying an airplane looks like and the decisions that I'm making as I go about it. And I tell them to shadow me on the controls. So I've got a set of controls, the throttle here and the yokes right here and the rudder pedals, and they have the same set over on the other side. And I ask them to shadow me on the controls so they can kind of get a feel for it. They kind of are able to, see what that feels like. And then little by little, as I've done it a couple times, then I say, okay, now you have the controls. So I let them fly the aircraft as we're flying around the pattern and doing some, we call them touch and go landings. And I let them fly the aircraft, and I say, I'm going to shadow you on the controls, and I'll give an occasional input. And over time, as I do it a couple times, I try and lessen my inputs, both my verbal inputs and the hand inputs that I give them. So I do that a number of times, and then when I feel like they're starting to get it, I put my hands on my lap. And you can see their breathing kind of increased at that point. So I put my hands on my lap and tell them, okay, just keep flying. I don't really say anything, and I'm increasingly trying to say less and less to trust them more and more with what they're doing. And the last thing that I do is, I sit on my hands. So I'm sitting there, and in order for me to reach up and grab the controls, they can really see now their heart rate really starts to go. And I can almost feel their sweaty palms on the controls as they're holding the aircraft. And I'll have them land a couple times, and sometimes it's not very good, but safe enough, until we get to a point where I say, okay, once you land this one and pull off the runway. So they'll pull off the runway, and I get out of the aircraft, and I say, okay, why don't you take it around the pattern a couple times by yourself? So I will climb out of the aircraft, shut the door, and now they're really nervous because nobody's going to fix their bad radio call or do anything with their flying, because they have to do it all themselves. And they take off, and I kind of close my eyes at some of the first landings as they kind of bounce down, and they go around because they have to reapproach because their approach wasn't good. But ultimately, they figure it out. And this all happens in oftentimes less than 10 hours of flying. I think my record is getting somebody to fly solo in about 5 hours. You think that's pretty quick to make those decisions. So pretty quick, I'm stepping away as the leader and letting them do it on their own because they need that confidence. And then once they're up there by themselves, they realize, if they didn't already, they're literally making hundreds of decisions. So these are hundreds of potentially life-altering decisions that they're making of, when do I pull the nose back? How much throttle do I put in? When do I start my turn? What altitude do I climb at? How close am I, to the runway? And which fuel tank am I selecting? And if it's a retractable gear, when do I put the gear down? Over and over, all these different decisions they're having to make, hundreds of decisions, and I can't be there the whole time. Which is why I have to trust them and get them to where they feel confident in their own decisions as quickly as possible so that they can go, and then pretty soon they're on their way to being full-fledged, unsupervised pilots sitting on the right seat of Delta for you guys to go around the country. So hopefully I'm teaching them correctly. How much are you trusting your team? How quickly are you relinquishing controls and letting your team fly the aircraft? How much are you letting them, or how much are you letting them fully embrace your vision? So another example, going back to when I deployed to Afghanistan, that one time, I was, as the commander, and we showed up in country, and right before showing up in country, we had certified 10 flight leads. Now, a flight lead means they not only fly their 40,000-pound aircraft, loaded with weapons and sensors, but they're leading somebody else. They're leading another pilot, and they're the one who's responsible to talk to the ground commander, to do the briefing, to check the weather, to navigate through the weather, to figure out where the air refueler is to get gas, to understand the map, understand the ground commander's intent and what the scheme of maneuver is for that ground commander. It's a lot of responsibility. And we certified 10 as combat flight leads before we went to Afghanistan. None of these had ever flown in combat before, so this is all brand new for them, and here I'm asking them to lead in that situation. Pretty weighty responsibility. So we showed up in country, and I walk into my office, and my leadership team comes in and says, "Hey, boss, what do you think about having the new flight leads fly as wingmen for a couple of sorties just to get their sea legs, to get comfortable with the job so we're not throwing them to the wolves? And that was actually very common. Most squadrons did it that way. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, I'm not going to do that. I certified them personally as flight leads. I told them I trust them. I told them I trust them with their aircraft, with the mission, with everything that revolves around the world's greatest CAS. I can't take that trust back from them once I've already certified them. And the results were amazing. The results, we went out during that deployment, we flew 15,000 flight hours, which is a lot. We employed lethal ordnance about 1,200 times. 300 of them within literally 100 meters of friendly position. When you think about an A-10 gun, I should have brought the bullet to show you, but an A-10 gun, it has a ricochet of up to 13,000 feet. That's, do the math, that's over 2 miles. The ricochet can be up to 13,000 feet. And here, they're firing it 100 meters away from friendly forces. That meant that they knew where the enemy was, they knew where the friendlies were, they understood the scheme of maneuver. They did fantastic. We didn't have a single fratricide incident where we harmed a friendly, and we didn't have a single civilian casualty event. And we're employing the whole time in little villages and cities, not a single incident of hurting the wrong person. They did amazing. How many times have you been given trust and then had that trust pulled back? Or your boss wants to give a little bit of extra supervision, just to make sure you're comfortable, just to make sure you're good. It's a tough call as a boss, but always, think about that situation. I was giving these 10 kids life or death decision-making authority. That's a pretty responsible, pretty important project right there. Life or death decision-making authority, and I trusted them, and I couldn't take that trust back. So think about your own situation. Think about situations you've been in as a subordinate, as a team member, and how much you've been, how much that's been taken away from you at any given moment. How many people here micromanage or have micromanaged in their life? The rest of you are liars. Because we all do it. It goes back to that teaching thing. There were times when I was teaching a student how to fly, and I'd have my hands on the controls, and I didn't need to give an input because they had it figured out, and I'd give a little input because I was nervous. And I needed to not do that. And often I'll say, I screwed that up. I should have not touched the controls. I'm sorry, you have the aircraft. Just to confirm to him or her that I had intervened when I didn't need to intervene, that they had that. It's a challenging line between providing guidance, vision, and how to, putting your hands too much on what they're doing. And there are a lot of different ways where we can micromanage. I had a boss once, and he had been in my exact chair at some point, in the near recent, and he was very good at his job. He had been very good at his job when he was in my position, and now he's my boss. He gave me a great paycheck, a great job title. On paper, all the responsibility I wanted at that point in that development of my career, and yet he constantly was in my chili. He constantly was giving me input on how I needed to do my job. It got to the point where I never took phone calls around him because he had, it's funny because he was deaf in one ear, but with that other ear, he was bionic, and he could hear everything on the phone. And I would hold the phone, and he would be giving me input from behind. I'm like, why don't I just pass the phone to you? You're paying me just to be a go-between on this phone call. And so I didn't feel empowered. I didn't feel trusted. When you're micromanaged, how do you react? Think about that for a second. I'll tell you how I react, and I'm not proud of it, but I think it's pretty common. After a while, I fight, and then fighting is no fun. And so I just kind of sit back after that. I just kind of sit back and I'm like, well, I'm not going to jump ahead and do something because I know I'm going to get corrected anyway. I know I'm going to get told the right way of doing things, so I'm just going to back off and wait till they tell me what to do. My other reaction is equally as toxic and equally as damaging to a culture, I think, even though it may move a task forward, and that is I just don't talk to my boss. I'm like, well, I know where he wants me to go or she wants me to go. I got the vision, and I'm type A, so I'm going to take that vision, I'm going to run with it, and I'm not going to forward emails to them. I'm not going to give them information because I'm doing it. I think I'm doing it the right way. That's also not the right way to do things. But both of those are a result of micromanagement. And micromanagement is a killer of trust. The minute you step in too much, somebody goes, well, I guess it's not my job, it's their job. That's not what you want. You want to be able to have your team feel trusted from start to finish. This is what trust does for you. It empowers down to the lowest, whatever level you trust, which needs to be as low as possible in an organization. It empowers them. It empowers them to make decisions. It empowers them to act. It begets ownership. People act when they feel like it's theirs. People move when they feel like they have a stake in it, when they feel like it's their responsibility, their vision. And I love what I put on the last one there is it enables forward-facing leaders. What do I mean by that? It means that I am constantly, I'm not looking behind me. I'm not worrying about what my team is doing here because they've got my back and they're taking care of it, which allows me to look forward and focus on my customer, my vision, where I'm going next with the project that I'm working on. What's my next project? What is the next vision that I got to put together to then hand to them because they're going to run with it and do miraculous things with it? That's what trust does. So it gets everybody involved, it gets everybody excited, it inspires, like I talked about, when you have a vision, and it allows the leader to continually look forward instead of getting stuck on yesterday and stuck on even the today. So how do we know that our team not only gets our vision, but beyond getting our vision, how do we know that they're tracking in that direction? How do we know that they don't just get the words and understand the words, but they're making regular course corrections for that vision, that they're tracking in the direction that I want them to, and so that I don't have to go and do the job? How do I know that they get it? Well, I said I was a fighter pilot, and how I've learned how to do this is, fighter pilot debrief. And I love flying an A-10, a lot of aircraft. I love going upside down. I love pulling G's. I love doing everything that it involved. But I think what I love, from a long-term perspective, what I love the most is the incessant desire to be better with each mission. There's the non-stop desire to fulfill, to realize that vision. In my case earlier, of world's greatest close air support pilot, world's greatest close air support team. I love that. And this is how a typical mission goes, training or otherwise, in a fighter squadron. So you get your mission, and sometimes you'll take a day preparing for that mission. You'll come up with your objectives. What do we want to accomplish in this mission? Now you have the ground commander, and you'll get his direction. This is where our forces are trying to move. These are the people that are at risk. These are the things that I'm concerned about. And so you'll take all that, and then as a flight, you'll say, okay, our objectives are to do X, Y, and Z. And so you focus on that, and you build a mission. You plan the mission based on that. And then about 2 hours prior to the flight, you brief that mission. You brief that mission for 50 minutes, and everything is objective focused. Objectives that are nested in that vision of what you're trying to do. And then after you've done that, you go fly the mission, and you fly it focused on that. And during the mission, we had a recorder that was recording our heads-up display, and it was recording our screens, or it was recording our GPS track throughout the flight. If we were on a training mission, it would record our bombs, we'd get our bomb scores recorded, how close we were to hitting the bullseye on our training bombs. And then I also, especially as an instructor, I took notes. I took notes with every sortie and the notes, I tried to keep them objective focused and goal focused for that mission. And I land one of my favorite practices because I don't have a great memory. And sometimes I couldn't read my handwriting, and I'm flying an airplane pulling 4 Gs and trying to write notes on my leg, and sometimes what I wrote made no sense at all, so I had to go, okay, what did I say there? And I'd have to, as I'd pull off the runway, and they're pinning my weapons, and and doing an inspection of the aircraft, making sure nothing had fallen off when I was flying, I'd go through it and make sure that everything was good, and then take some notes of what I remembered, my recollections. And then about an hour and a half after the flight, we'd sit down and we would debrief, and it would be objective focus. And we'd go through and find debrief focus points where we either succeeded or we failed at our objectives, and then we would come up with lessons learned and instructional fixes for that. And that was very powerful. And one of the great things about debrief is that you take off the rank. So myself as a colonel, I'd walk into the debrief, and I'd have some young lieutenant who had, I had 20 years of service on him and thousands of flight hours on him, but his opinion mattered just as much as my opinion as we went through. And one of the things we would focus on is what we called truth data. The truth data was the recordings. The truth data were the bomb scores. The truth data was, did we take care of the ground commander's intent? Did we meet his objectives? And how close were we to those objectives? That was truth data, and that became the starting point for the discussion. Opinions are nice. Opinions can be helpful, especially experienced opinions, but sometimes they can lead us down the wrong path. Sometimes, because of opinions, we can miss something. So when you're coming up with a method of debrief, having a way to record and having a way to keep track of what actually happened so that what I'm debriefing, no kidding, is tying me back to that vision through those objectives, through those goals. And so we would go through the debrief, and then every time it's, how can we do this better the next time? So I want you to think about your own organizations, because flying was really easy. I said I'd get the mission, we'd prepare for the mission, I would do the briefing beforehand, we'd fly, and then we had time carved out right after the flight to then go ahead and debrief. In your teams, it's not as clean cut sometimes, but I challenge you to, number one, make sure that all that you're doing is vision focused with those nested goals and objectives, and that you have a habitual, regular way of debriefing, and a habitual way of, so your team knows. It's not just you're going to sit down when something goes wrong. You're going to provide them an opportunity every time, because it's not about did we do it wrong and the boss coming in and saying, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that and why did you screw that up? But it's about knowing every single time that I act, my goal is up here. Chances are I'm going to end up somewhere down here. What do we need to do as a team to get us closer to perfection, closer to that desired end state? What is it that we have to do? And like I said, we would take the rank off, and it was important that I led a team debrief. And the way we did debriefs, and even when I was a commander, sometimes I would listen in just to see how debriefs were going with other flights, but I had to keep my mouth shut because it wasn't my debrief. I wasn't the instructor. You had a flight lead, and that's the responsible team. The flight lead and the team members, they're the responsible team for the effective debrief. Just like taking ownership of the vision at the very beginning and trusting your team with the actions, you haven't fully trusted them if you don't trust them with the corrections when they're a little bit off target. So you have to let the team debrief. You have to let the team come up with their solutions. instead of you automatically giving your solutions. That's like giving the test answers. If you know you have the test answers, you're not going to study. And you're not going to spend the rigor that is required for you to internalize the lessons because you've already got the answers. So your boss gives you the answers, and so, well, we already know what the answer is, so let's not spend any time on it, as opposed to having to go through the intellectual rigor of what is it that we need to do to be better, to meet our objectives. That's absolutely critical. Let me give you another example from that same deployment. We had an exchange officer, a French exchange officer. His name was Shrek. Shrek because he had these big fat fingers. I don't know how he did the small little buttons, but he was a great pilot. And Shrek, but he didn't know how to fly the A-10 well. I mean, he was new to the A-10, and he was also new to our mission, to close air support. And but he tried real hard. And one time he went out, and he was a flight lead, and one time he went out, and he misunderstood the symbolism, the symbology in his heads-up display. It's where you'll have targeting information, and the little symbols will sit on top of, as you roll in and point your nose at something, it'll say, yeah, the friendlies are there, the enemy's there, or this building, Alpha is there. And he misunderstood his symbology, and he was cleared onto a target, and he fired near the friendly position. Luckily, the coordinates that he had into his system were off a little bit, and the friendlies happened to be behind this big Afghani mud wall, and it stopped the rounds from hurting anybody. They immediately aborted him. They sent him home, and he was crushed because, part of the world's greatest close air support is we don't hurt the wrong people. And he had almost killed friendlies. I mean, he was devastated. He felt terrible about it. And he thought I was going to fire him, demote him, send him home, make him sit the ground and not fly again because I didn't trust him. And I watched his tape. I went through it myself. I drew my own lessons when I did that by myself instead of with anybody present, in case I winced out loud, and I didn't want anybody to see that. And so I watched it, and I sat down with him, and I said, Shrek, I need you to debrief this, to fully debrief this, and I want you to go into the manuals that talk about the symbology, and I want you to go back and re-listen to the tape over and over and come up with your own lesson learned and instructional fixes for this. And then after you do that, I want you to brief not just your flight, but I want you to brief the entire squadron because this is a pretty serious thing. So he did that, and then he debriefed the flight, and I think I surprised him because afterwards, I brought him into my office. I said, okay, fine. Now I want you to go lead again. Now I want you to show that you've learned the lessons from your mistakes. And he was floored that I did that I would trust him after he had made such a monumental mistake, almost killing somebody. Think about your own projects, teams that work for you. When somebody makes a terrible, terrible mistake, how do you handle it? Do you cut them off? Do you demote them? Do you change the way they fit into the organization? Or do you help them maintain ownership to become who you need them to be on your team? And quite frankly, I needed him to be a flight lead. I needed him to be a leader. He had made a mistake. I needed him to fix it, not for him to take my fixes. Because I had instructed him before. I'd flown with him before. I had given him all that instruction, and it didn't stick for some reason. And that often happens. I was a great instructor, just ask me. And I gave him this great instruction, and he didn't get it. How is that? He needed to learn and internalize it himself. And so that's what the debrief accomplished for him. To learn and internalize it himself, having gone through the whole process and maintaining ownership of that process. So he went out and flew. And what I did is unknowingly, I created a more confident pilot, but I also created an advocate for myself as the team leader. Shrek from then on out would do anything I asked him to do because he knew I had his back. He knew that despite his shortcomings, despite his mistakes, I still wanted him on the team and I still valued him as a team member. So think of your own teams when somebody makes that mistake and how you treat them, how you can turn them into an even greater advocate for you as a leader. How many people here have taught somebody how to drive a car? Yeah, I talked about flying earlier. I think driving is scarier. I've taught 5 teenagers how to drive. And you're going down the road sitting next to your teenager, and you don't have any controls, unlike the airplane. And you're going down the road, and anytime you go, they go, relax, I got it. And they're trying to assure you that everything's okay. Never mind that they just missed a semi by inches going 70 miles an hour down the highway. And that really happened to me. So I know it. That's a scary thing. But little by little, they learn the skills that they think they have when they begin. And they learn the skills. And the real test is when you kind of close your eyes, you take your keys and you throw it to them, and you say a really big prayer, and you say, go have fun with your friends. And of those 5 drivers, I can say that all 5 of them have become good drivers. All 5 of them, I don't worry about them going out and wandering around on the roads by themselves because they have ownership of that task. They all own their own cars now, and I'm not paying for them. They're paying for their own cars and I'm paying for their own insurance, and so they have ownership of that. And that all had to start with me giving a little bit of instruction, showing them how, throwing them the keys that first time. And then that second time, throwing them the keys. How as an aside, let me ask you a question. How do people feel when you give them trust? Or how do you feel and how do you react when you give somebody trust and that trust is broken? Like, now how am I supposed to handle this? And this is one of the most challenging situations, but I think it happens more often than not. Because in a small way or a very large way, somebody breaks that trust. You know, like my friend Shrek. Somebody breaks that trust. One of my kids, I was at another time I was in Afghanistan. I called home. This is on New Year's, so I'm calling home to, wish everybody Happy New Year. It was already New Year's morning for us, and New Year's Day for us. And I was calling home New Year's Eve to talk to my family. And one of my children answers the phone. I said, "Hey, how you doing? Where's Mom?" She goes, "Oh, she's out with this other child. She wrecked your truck." Okay, well, Happy New Year to you too. So turns out that she had gone out with some friends. She was supposed to be going to a party. That party wasn't fun enough. So they went joyriding on a dirt road, and on that dirt road, lost control, hit a pole, flipped the truck, totaled the first new car I'd ever bought myself, totaled it. I thought, what am I supposed to do now? She had wrecked my truck. How can I trust her going forward? Well, the truth of the matter is I needed to trust her. I needed her to eventually, sooner rather than later, become an adult, somebody who cares for themselves, who pays their own insurance, who buys their own car. I needed her to get to that point. I didn't want her living in my basement for the next 20 years. So I had to trust her with that. I had to trust her with the ability to drive on her own. So received a little remedial discussion, and then she went out on her own. I again threw her the keys, and now I'm happy to say that she's probably my safest and my most cautious driver. She's the one who's very militant about you will put a seatbelt on, and don't go too fast, and she's very much so that way. And maybe she just needed to learn those lessons and needed to feel that trust and needed to feel ownership for it so that she could move forward herself. This is what a debrief does for us. It refocuses us on the vision. If we do it correctly, it forces correction at the right level. If you as a supervisor don't step in when you need the right person doing it. And the foot stomper at the bottom that I didn't really realize, I didn't understand for many years, was that it enables explosive growth. When you don't have people who you're delegating your task to and they're just doing your bidding, but instead you have an entire team that is engaged in what matters for you as a leader, everybody's excited, everybody's moving in a certain direction, and everybody contributes to that explosive growth. In closing, I want to talk about the first time I was asked to kill somebody. And I don't say that lightly to pound my chest at all, because I don't take it lightly. I just want you to understand the gravity of it. And I want you to think about the gravity of some of the things you do. And you may not be asking anybody to take somebody's life, but you're still asking people to do things that are life-changing for them and for the organization. Everything that you do, if you think about it this way, everything that you do has the potential to move people in the right direction, to give them a better life, to give the organization a better future, to realize that overall vision. I deployed late. My squadron was already there, and everybody else, they're grizzled combat veterans, even the young guys. And I was a senior pilot, but I'd never flown in combat before, so I'm a little nervous. And I was a little rusty because I hadn't flown in a number of months because I was focusing on another part of my job for a while, another project that I was responsible for. And I get there and I fly with my squadron commander, and we go out, and about 3/4 of the way into the mission, we get into a fight where the friendly forces are taking fire from this position, and they ask for our help, and they identify the position. It's all coming from this one building on the corner. I can see it right now in the northeast corner of this town. And my flight lead says, "I want you to put a 500-pound bomb on that building." I said, "Okay." And I was just hanging on to the radios. We have 3 radios, trying to keep track of where the friendly civilians and the enemy were, and who's what, and what angle they want me to run in from, and all these different restrictions. And again, I was rusty because I hadn't flown in a while. But I said, "Okay." And I roll in, and I made a couple mistakes rolling in. And it doesn't take that much to make a big mistake when you're dropping a 500-pound bomb. And the bomb sailed over the corner of the building and hit in the courtyard behind it. And I came off target, and I was so angry at myself. I'm constantly berating myself as I get back up above the target, berating myself for the stupid mistake that I made. And my flight lead says, "No big deal, just set back up and re-attack." So I had made a mistake. I had made the squadron look bad. I had not accomplished the mission that the ground commander wanted me to, and he was asking me to do it again. So I set back up. This next pass was better. Bomb hit the middle of the building, destroyed the building. Enemy fire stopped. And for the rest of the flight home, I wasn't focusing on the good that I'd done. I was focusing on the mistake that I'd made. And how in the world could he trust me? And we went back and we set up in the debrief, and he led the debrief, but he let me debrief my actions, and I stepped him through what I had done and the mistakes I had made. And he said, "Okay," and he gave me a couple of instructional points. And he said, so that at the end of that sortie, where I'm thinking, he's never going to trust me again, he cleared me to go not only fly again, but to be a flight lead. And I don't think he realizes what that meant to me. Here, I had taken his baby, which was his squadron, and the reputation of his squadron, and I had tarnished it by making a mistake. And he let me take ownership from start to finish of that mistake to correct it, and then he sent me out the door again as a flight lead. He trusted me. And I can honestly say that that was a dramatic change in my life as a leader, in my confidence as a leader. And when you make that kind of a difference in an individual's life, top to bottom in an organization, you develop explosive growth. You create a culture of confident decision makers. The decisions aren't just being made at the level of the boss. You have a culture of confident decision makers from top to bottom, and it's amazing. Provide a vision, entrust people with that vision, and have a system of integrated debrief, habitual debrief, and that's what you're going to get, a culture, a positive culture, one that generates explosive growth. I know it to be true. I've seen it over and over, and I appreciate your time in listening to me, and I wish you the best in your own culture, your small or large culture, and creating your own culture to get that explosive growth that you need in your organization. Thank you. There you go.